Evelyn Thorne stood on the narrow balcony of her Chicago apartment, the city lights flickering like dying stars below. The humid August air clung to her skin as she lit another cigarette, the flame trembling slightly in her fingers. Her editor's words from the morning call still echoed. 2 girls murdered in Thornwood. Teeth pulled out. Same sick little town you escaped from. This story has your name written all over it. Evie. Deadline in 3 weeks. She hadn't returned to Thornwood, Louisiana, in 10 years. Not since she'd driven out of town at 19 with fresh stitches, hidden under her clothes and a promise carved into her thigh. Never again. Thornwood was a decaying pearl on the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin. Spanish moss hanging like funeral veils from ancient cypress trees. The air thick with the smell of rot, mud, and old secrets. Population 2,847. Everyone knew your name, your sins, and the color of your mother's curtains. Evie packed light, 2 black shirts with long sleeves, jeans, her laptop, and a small leather pouch containing the only things that ever brought her comfort. A pack of razor blades, antiseptic, and gauze. She rented a silver sedan at New Orleans Airport and drove north as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches. By the time she crossed the town line, night had fallen. The welcome sign read Thornwood, where roots run deep. Someone had spray painted or bleed underneath it in red. Magnolia House appeared at the end of a long tunnel of live oaks, its white columns glowing under floodlights like bones in moonlight. Evie killed the engine and sat for a long minute, heart hammering against her ribs. The front door opened before she could knock. Vivian Loron stood there, 58, still impossibly beautiful, skin like porcelain, ice blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Her pale yellow linen dress was immaculate despite the humidity. "Evelyn," she said, voice smooth as poisoned honey. "You finally came home. You look unwell." Evie forced a smile. "Hello, Mother." Inside, the house smelled exactly as she remembered. Lemon polish, gardenias, and something faintly medicinal underneath. 13-year-old Lila Loron descended the grand staircase like a child actress in a horror film. Blonde curls, pale pink dress, bare feet silent on the hardwood. She studied Evie with cold curiosity. "So you're the sister who cuts herself," Lila said sweetly. "Mommy keeps your old bandages in a box upstairs." Dinner was served in the formal dining room. Shrimp étouffée, cornbread, pecan pie. Vivian watched every bite Evie took, refilling her plate constantly. "You're far too thin, darling. Eat. I made this with extra cream. Just how you used to love it before you became difficult." That night, in her old bedroom with its faded pink canopy bed, Evie locked the door, stripped off her long-sleeved shirt, and stood before the mirror. Her arms and torso were a private gallery of pain. Words carved in careful, raised scars. Useless, liar, sorry, mother, monster. She chose a fresh spot on her inner thigh, pressed the blade down, and slowly carved a new word, home. The sting grounded her. Blood beaded like tiny rubies. She cleaned it carefully, bandaged it, and lay awake listening to the house breathe around her. The next morning, she drove to the police station, a squat brick building that looked embarrassed to exist. Detective Richard Willis was waiting. Mid-40s, tall, quiet eyes that had seen too much. "Miss Thorne," he said, shaking her hand. "Or should I say Loron?" "Thorne," she corrected. "I don't use my mother's name anymore." He slid a file across the desk. "Natalie Keene, 13, found behind the abandoned paper mill 6 days ago. All her teeth removed post-mortem. And Nash, 11, discovered 3 days later in the swamp. Same signature. Both girls had reputations for being difficult. Fighters, runaways, biters. Small towns eat their own, Willis said quietly. Especially the ones that don't fit the picture. Evie spent the day talking to families. Natalie's mother chain-smoked on her porch, eyes sunken. She was always biting other kids. Said she liked the taste of blood. Guess someone finally returned the favor. Ann's father showed Evie the big oak tree where his daughter used to climb. She was wild, like you were back in the day. Remember when they called you the Thornwood Terror? Everyone remembered. By evening, Evie was back at Magnolia House. Lila was waiting on the porch swing, legs tucked under her. Want to see something? She opened a small velvet pouch and poured out a handful of small white objects into Evie's palm. Teeth. Perfect, small human teeth. Evie's stomach clenched. Where did you get these? Lila smiled, all innocence. From girls who were mean to me at school. Mommy says some flowers need to be pruned so the garden stays beautiful. That night, Evie followed her half-sister through the backyard into the swamp. Lila moved like she belonged there. A pale ghost among the cypress knees and black water. Evie watched from the shadows as the girl crouched by an old stump and buried something small. When Lila returned to the house, Evie dug it up. Another tooth. The town was closing ranks already. Old high school acquaintances crossed the street to avoid her. At the local cafe, conversations died when she entered. Vivian hosted her weekly garden club the next afternoon. Women in pearls and pastel dresses sipping sweet tea while discussing the murders as if they were mildly unpleasant weather. Evie cornered her mother in the solarium among blooming orchids. Did you know those girls? Vivian arranged a flower with delicate fingers. Of course not, but I do know their mothers. Poor stock, weak blood. Not like us, Evelyn. Later that night, Detective Willis called. We found a third body, Jade Morrow, 14. Found in your mother's garden an hour ago. Throat cut, teeth missing. Evie stood in the hallway of Magnolia House, phone pressed to her ear, blood roaring in her ears. Through the doorway, she could see Lila watching her from the staircase, smiling with too many teeth. The house felt like it was breathing, closing in. Evie went to her room, locked the door, and cut deeper than she had in years. Trapped. The police swarmed Magnolia House at dawn. Yellow tape fluttered across the back garden like cheap ribbon. Detective Willis looked exhausted. Your mother is being questioned. Again. Vivian sat in the sunlit parlor like a queen receiving visitors, perfectly composed. This is ridiculous. I was hosting bridge night until 11. Ask my friends. But her friends had already started talking. Rumors Evie remembered from her own childhood resurfaced. Mysterious illnesses, hospital visits, Vivian's obsessive nursing. Doctors had praised her devotion. No one had ever looked closer. Evie confronted her mother that evening in the kitchen while Vivian prepared chamomile tea. You made me sick as a child, didn't you? All those stomach problems. The vomiting. The weakness. Vivian didn't even blink. I kept you alive, Evelyn. You were a difficult child. Always trying to run away. I had to make sure you needed me. Lila appeared in the doorway in her white nightgown, holding the silver fruit knife. Mommy loves us so much she makes us stay. The truth spilled out in pieces over the next 48 hours. Vivian Loran had spent decades perfecting her craft. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She poisoned her daughters slowly, lovingly. Made them dependent. Made them hers. When Evie had tried to escape at 16, Vivian had escalated. When that failed, she'd started over with Lila, younger, more malleable. The murdered girls had been cruel to Lila at school. They had called her Mommy's broken doll. They had laughed at her frequent hospital absences. Vivian couldn't allow that, so she taught her daughter how to prune the garden. Lila had taken to it with terrifying enthusiasm. The final confrontation happened deep in the swamp at the old hunting shack Vivian had used for years as her private treatment room. Jars of extracted teeth lined the shelves like trophies. Blood-stained pastel dresses hung on hooks. A small altar with photographs of Evie and Lila as children sat in the corner. Vivian arrived carrying a silver tray with 2 cups of medicine. She was still wearing pearls. "My beautiful broken girls," she cooed. "Time to come home properly." Evie had already called Willis. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer. Lila moved first, a blur of white and silver. The knife flashed. Vivian gasped as the blade sank into her side. "Lila, darling, Mommy loves you. You made me sick," Lila screamed, stabbing again. "You made Evie leave." Evie threw herself into the struggle. The blade caught her forearm, reopening an old scar in a bright line of pain. Blood sprayed across the wooden floor. For the first time in her life, the pain felt like liberation instead of punishment. Vivian fell among the broken jars, orchids floating in pools of blood and formaldehyde. She reached out one elegant hand toward her daughters. "I only wanted to keep you safe." She died whispering their names. When Detective Willis and the officers burst into the shack, they found Evie on her knees, pressing gauze to her bleeding arm, and Lila curled in the corner, rocking, covered in their mother's blood. 3 weeks later, Evie stood at Thornwood Cemetery under a gray sky. Vivian's grave was fresh, the dirt still dark. Lila had been sent to a secure psychiatric facility in Baton Rouge. The doctors said she might never recover. Evie pressed a fresh razor blade against her left thigh. She carved one final word, slow and deliberate, tears mixing with the blood. "Free." She bandaged it carefully, then walked back to her rental car. The town watched her leave from behind lace curtains. Some waved. Most didn't. As she drove across the town line, Evie rolled down every window. The humid Louisiana air rushed in, carrying the smell of swamp and possibility. In the rearview mirror, Magnolia House grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the moss-draped trees. She didn't stop cutting entirely. Some habits die harder than mothers. But the words changed. On her right forearm, a new scar began to form over the coming months. Living. Some wounds, Evie learned, had to be opened completely, violently, honestly, before they could ever begin to heal. But in the deep green heart of the Atchafalaya Basin, the cypress trees still whispered, the Spanish moss still swayed, and on quiet evenings, people swore they could hear the faint sound of little girls laughing on bicycles, their smiles far too wide, teeth gleaming white in the gathering dark. The end.